the student should continue reasoning with his father. Since I certainly hope you do not suppose that, if I am currently doing the wrong thing, it is by my own deliberate choice. I want to be good. So what else could possibly explain my current error but simple ignorance? And would not you much rather that I be cured of that ignorance? When did a father's shouting anger, however, ever successfully teach someone how to play a musical instrument or how to pilot a complex ship? Do you honestly imagine that your yelling anger is going to help teach me the far more complex business of navigating human life? But Epictetus warns his students, using that noble line of argument with your parents strongly assumes that such a desire to be good actually is your true, sincere motive for studying philosophy here. Unfortunately, anyone who is just learning logic and just attending my philosophy lectures simply to make a shallow show of erudition at a fancy dinner party is perfectly satisfied just to win the superficial respect of some rich senator seated beside him at the table. For in that worldly society, that is exactly where the important matters seem to be, and the true philosophical treasures taught in this school are accounted as mere trifles out there. Consequently, he points out, it is incredibly hard to be the master of one's own mental impressions in matters of real-world ethics, simply because the external things that constantly muddle and confuse the human judgment are so incredibly many. To illustrate these muddled worldly values, Epictetus tells a story about extreme greed. I personally know of one very wealthy man, he says, who literally cried, desperately clinging to the knees of the powerful Epictetus, crying about how terribly miserable he was now that he was supposedly down to his absolute last million. And what exactly did Epictetus do in response to this ridiculous whining? Epictetus asks his students, did he laugh at the greedy man, exactly as you are laughing at him now? No, he did not laugh. Because Epictetus shared the exact same corrupt values, he was genuinely appalled by the man's financial loss, and he earnestly said to him, "Dear man, how on earth did you manage to keep silent about this terrible tragedy up until now? How have you possibly endured such horrible suffering?" Epictetus then uses a classroom incident to make a broader point. When Epictetus was correcting a particular student who was struggling while reading aloud the hypothetical arguments in class, the other person who had originally assigned the student that reading began loudly ridiculing the poor reader. Epictetus immediately stopped the mockery and said to the ridiculer, "You are actually just laughing at yourself. You did not prepare this student properly beforehand, nor did you make absolutely sure that he could actually understand these complex arguments. And still, despite your own failure as a teacher, you selfishly use him as a public reader." Well then, Epictetus continued, drawing a philosophical lesson from the interruption. If a person's mind does not yet have the basic logical aptitude to simply follow and accurately judge a standard conjunctive argument in a textbook, why on earth do we all just assume that his mind is somehow perfectly capable of accurately awarding moral praise, or correctly assigning moral blame, or forming a valid, trustworthy judgment about things that are genuinely good and bad in real life? If that untrained person thinks ill of another person, will the other person actually care about that flawed opinion? Or if he happens to admire someone, will that someone jump for joy at the compliment? Why should they care, when in such minor, basic matters of textbook logic he cannot even make a simple inference or draw a correct conclusion? This exact realization, then, Epictetus declares, is the absolute true beginning of all philosophy, an honest, humble awareness of one's own current mental fitness. A clear consciousness of your mind's current weakness will safely keep you from prematurely tackling subjects that are simply too difficult for you right now. As it is in the real world, though, he notes, some arrogant people will strain and struggle just to read a short pamphlet, and yet they still ambitiously want to devour an entire, massive philosophical treatise. Naturally, because they lack the foundation, they cannot intellectually digest it, and so they get heartily sick of the whole business of philosophy and quit. Instead of rushing, he advises, they need to first honestly figure out exactly what their current mental capacity is. In the academic realm of logic, it is very easy to intellectually refute someone who is clearly ignorant of the subject. But he observes, in the much messier affairs of real life, absolutely no one voluntarily offers himself up to be critically examined by others. And whoever actually presumes to examine our lives and point out our flaws, we immediately and bitterly resent them for it. And yet, Epictetus concludes, remembering his great role model, the wise Socrates always used to say that the completely unexamined life was simply not worth living. The text moves to a new chapter titled, In How Many Ways Impressions Arise, and what aids we should provide against them. Epictetus starts by laying out a fundamental psychological framework. Mental impressions, he explains, actually come to us in exactly 4 different ways. First, things truly are exactly as they appear to be to us. Second, things are not and they accurately do not appear to be. Third, things actually are, but they falsely do not appear to be. Or fourth, things actually are not, and yet they falsely appear to be real. The primary duty of a truly educated person, Epictetus asserts, in absolutely all of these 4 confusing cases, is simply to judge the impression correctly. And whatever specific thing happens to disturb our rational judgment, for that exact disturbance we urgently need to find a targeted solution. For instance, he says, if the tricky philosophical sophisms of the skeptical Pyrrhonists and the academics are what currently trouble us and confuse our minds, we must actively look for the specific logical antidote to those arguments. On the other hand, if it is the deceptive plausibility of physical things in the world, causing some external things to falsely seem morally good to us when they actually are not, then let us seek a practical remedy right there. Or, if it is simply a bad mental habit that troubles us and throws off our judgment, then we must try our hardest to find a direct corrective for that specific habit. So he asks, what practical aid can we possibly find to effectively combat a deeply ingrained bad habit? The answer is simple, the intentionally opposed habit. He gives a common example of bad habits in speech. You constantly hear ordinary people in society commonly saying dramatic things like, "Oh, he died, the poor man." Or they cry out, "His poor father perished and his mother perished too." Or they lament, "What a tragedy, he was violently cut down in his prime and in a lonely foreign land." To combat this, Epictetus advises, you must intentionally lend your ear to completely different philosophical descriptions of life events. You must actively distance yourself from emotional statements exactly such as these, and you must diligently check one bad habit by practicing its direct opposite. Against tricky philosophical sophistry, one should always have the steady practice and rigorous exercise of rational argument. And against specious, deceptive impressions that look good but are not, one should always have their clear moral preconceptions perfectly polished and completely ready to hand at a moment's notice. He applies this to the ultimate fear. When physical death falsely appears to us as a genuine evil, we should always have ready the logical fact that it is our moral duty to avoid truly evil things, whereas physical death is absolutely necessary and simply cannot be avoided by anyone. I mean, Epictetus asks with a shrug, where exactly am I going to go in the world to get away from death? Maybe I am not the great mythical hero Sarpedon, the powerful son of Zeus, so that I can bravely say in the exact same grand manner as he did before battle, I will go, and either win the glorious prize for valor myself, or I will give another warrior the opportunity to gain it. Being that perfectly heroic may be far beyond us ordinary people, he admits, but at least the latter option, facing our inevitable end with some dignity, is completely within our reach. And where on earth can I possibly go to escape death in any case? He challenges his students. Tell me the name of the magical country. Give me the name of the specific people who are completely safe from death, where I can finally get permanent asylum. Provide me with the magic charm to ward it off. No, he concludes, the reality is that I simply cannot escape death. But he offers a powerful alternative. At the very least, I can completely escape the terrible fear of death. Or he asks sarcastically, do I really have to die miserably moaning and groaning in fear, too? He then explains the root of human anger. Destructive passions, he says, stem entirely from frustrated desire. So, the uneducated person thinks, if I am able to forcefully shape external conditions to perfectly suit my own selfish wishes, I will certainly do so. But if I am not able to do that, then I am perfectly ready to violently maul absolutely anyone who stands in my way. People by their very nature simply cannot endure being deprived of what they believe is the good, nor can they endure meeting up with what they believe is evil. And so, the uneducated person reasons, if, in the end, I just cannot forcefully alter my circumstances, or if I cannot physically tear to pieces the specific person who stubbornly prevents me from getting what I want, then I just sit down and bawl like a baby. I start verbally abusing absolutely everyone I can possibly think of, up to and strictly including Supreme Zeus and all the other gods. For this angry person thinks, if the gods do not actively look after my material desires, why on earth should I care about them at all? But someone might warn this angry person, you will be terribly blasphemous if you speak to the gods like that. Well, the angry person responds, what worse punishment could the gods possibly devise in that case that would actually make my current miserable situation any worse? Epictetus draws a profound conclusion from this human psychology. You must always remember that, as a general rule, unless religious piety and personal self-interest can be perfectly reconciled in a person's mind, true piety simply cannot be preserved, because people will always ultimately choose what they believe is in their own best interest. Do you not find that psychological truth completely convincing? Finally, he turns back to the skeptical philosophers. Let the doubting Pyrrhonist and the academic philosophers step forward right now to face us in debate, he challenges. He imagines their lazy, skeptical response. For my part, the skeptic says, I have absolutely no leisure time for all these deep philosophical controversies, nor can I simply side with common convention. Epictetus responds to the skeptic's dismissal. If I had a legal dispute about physical property, he says, I would have easily called in a professional lawyer to help with my specific case. But what exactly will meet my profound needs in this philosophical instance regarding perception and reality? He admits the complexity of human biology, the exact physical process of perception itself, whether it actually involves the entire human body or only a specific part of it. This exact biological mechanism I may not be able to perfectly explain to you, simply because either alternative seems logically problematic to me. But he argues, there is a fundamental baseline of reality that we cannot deny. That you and I are absolutely not the exact same person. Of that basic fact I am quite certain. I mean, he illustrates with a funny example. When I am hungry and I want to swallow something, I absolutely never mistakenly carry the food over to your mouth to feed it to you. I always carry it to my own mouth. And when I desperately want a piece of bread to eat, I absolutely do not accidentally grab a sweeping broom instead. I head straight for the bread, flying exactly like an arrow straight to its target. He challenges the skeptics directly. And you skeptical philosophers, he says, you who constantly try to intellectually dismiss the clear evidence of our physical senses, do you actually act any differently in your own daily lives? Which one of you skeptics ever mistakenly went to the grain mill when you were actually in need of a hot bath? None of you. Your actions prove you completely trust your senses, despite your arguments. A student asks, well, should not we philosophers be diligent, active defenders of common convention then, and should not we be constantly watchful for any intellectual attack on it? Certainly we should, Epictetus agrees, but only provided that we actually have the abundant leisure time for theoretical controversies of this kind. The ordinary person, however, who is currently trembling with fear, who is deeply upset, and who is inwardly broken in their spirit by the hardships of life, that suffering person desperately needs to spend his limited time entirely differently. He needs practical healing, not theoretical debates. The text then moves to a new chapter, beautifully titled, that we should not be angry with people, and what people account great and small. Epictetus begins by explaining the fundamental mechanics of human belief. The absolute sole cause of our mind assenting to the truth of something, he states, is simply that it currently appears to be a fact to us. And conversely, it is absolutely impossible for the human mind to assent to anything that does not clearly appear to be a fact. Why is this? He asks. It is simply the mind's inherent nature. By its very design, the mind will automatically assent to what seems to be the truth. It will automatically reject what seems to be false, and it will naturally suspend its judgment in cases that seem doubtful or unclear. Here, I will logically prove it to you right now, he says to his students. Force yourself to feel, if you possibly can, that it is actually night time right now, in the middle of the day. The student tries and says, impossible. Okay, Epictetus says, then force yourself to not feel that it is now day. Again the student says, impossible. All right, Epictetus challenges, try to definitively feel, or try to not feel, that the total number of stars in the universe is an even number. Once again, without evidence, the student must say, impossible. So Epictetus draws the profound conclusion, whenever you see someone who assents to a completely false proposition, you can be absolutely sure that they did not actively want to give their assent to a lie. Since, as the great philosopher Plato rightly says, every single soul is deprived of the truth entirely against its own will. They did not choose to be wrong. They simply, honestly mistook for true something that was actually false. Now he explains, with respect to our daily actions in the world, the case is exactly analogous to this logical process. Only, instead of judging statements as true and false, we emotionally react to our internal impressions of what is right and wrong, what is good and bad, and what is honest and dishonest. And just like with truth, he argues, It is absolutely impossible for a human being to genuinely think that an action will actually do us good, and then simultaneously not choose to do it. We always choose what we think is best for us. But a student raises a famous objection from mythology. What about the tragic figure Medea, though? The student points out that she explicitly says in the play, "I know that the terrible acts I intend are wrong, but my anger is the master of my intentions." She knows it is wrong, but she kills her children anyway. Epictetus expertly counters this. That poetic line only amounts to saying that, in that specific heated moment, Medea actually thinks that gratifying her own burning anger by violently exacting revenge on her cheating husband is somehow materially preferable to keeping her own children safe. Her judgment is horribly warped, but she is still choosing what she thinks is best for her in that exact moment. Yes, the student argues, but she is clearly in error. Well, Epictetus replies calmly, then simply demonstrate to her clearly and rationally that she is in error, and I promise you she will absolutely not act on her terrible idea. As long as you do not clearly lay the truth out for her, though, she has absolutely nothing else besides her own flawed, internal idea of right and wrong to guide her actions. So he concludes with a powerful lesson in empathy. Do not ever get angry at the poor woman for being so terribly confused about what is actually most important in life. Do not hate her for accordingly mutating from a rational human being into a venomous snake. You should pity her instead. We naturally take deep pity on the physically blind and the physically lame, he points out. So why on earth do we not logically pity people who are mentally blind and morally lame in respect of the things that matter most in the world? Whoever actually keeps in mind that absolutely all of our human actions are completely determined by our internal impressions, which can either be right or wrong, will find peace, Epictetus says. Think about it. If the impression is actually correct, we are morally innocent. But if our impression is incorrect, we must pay for it ourselves, since it is logically impossible that someone else should be penalized for our own personal error. Whoever keeps this psychological truth in mind will simply not be angry or upset with absolutely anyone in the world. They will not curse anyone, they will not blame anyone, and they certainly will not resent or malign anyone either, because they understand that people are just acting on their own flawed impressions. A student, amazed by this reduction of all human conflict to mere mental impressions, asks, so, in your view, the great, world-shaking tragedies of history are merely the result of this one simple thing, somebody's internal impression? Yes, Epictetus confirms, they are the result of that, and that alone. You take the epic poem The Iliad as an example. The entire Trojan War is absolutely nothing but people's personal impressions and exactly how they dealt with them. First, a flawed impression made the Trojan prince Paris decide to rob the Greek king Menelaus of his beautiful wife. And then, another flawed impression got Helen to agree to run away with him to Troy. Now, Epictetus suggests playfully, imagine if a different impression had come to Menelaus. What if he had reasoned that perhaps he was actually much better off losing such an unfaithful wife? Well, that simple change in his mental impression would have meant the total loss to us not just of the Iliad, but of the Odyssey as well, because the war never would have happened. The student pushes back. So you are actually saying that worldly matters so incredibly great owe their origin to something so incredibly trivial as a thought. But what exactly do you mean by matters so great? Epictetus challenges him. You mean massive wars, political factions, the tragic loss of many men in battle, the violent razing of entire cities. Tell me, what is actually so great about all of that destruction? What is so truly great about slaughtering many sheep or cattle in a field, or burning a lot of storks or swallows' nests in the trees? The student is offended. Can you really compare the two things? The destruction of human cities and the destruction of animal nests? Why not? Epictetus asks bluntly. In the one case, mortal human bodies are lost in the war. In the other case, the dead just happen to be farm animals. People's brick houses burn down, and so do the stork's stick nests. What is so earth-shaking or uniquely awful in that? Show me, logically, how a human house, considered merely as a physical shelter from the weather, is somehow fundamentally better than a stork's nest. The student protests. How can a simple stork even be compared with a human being? Well, Epictetus answers, where the physical body is concerned, there is actually a lot of similarity between them. The only real difference is that, in man's case, his physical body inhabits fancy houses composed of baked bricks and carved timber, while the stork's nests are just made of collected sticks and mud. They are both just physical bodies in physical shelters. So the student asks in disbelief, is there absolutely no distinction between a human person and a stork? Of course there is a profound distinction, Epictetus clarifies, but that distinction is absolutely not found in regard to these meaningless external things like bodies and houses. If you reflect on it, you will realize that man truly excels the animals in entirely other, higher respects. Man excels in taking rational cognizance of his own behavior. He excels in being deeply sociable, perfectly trustworthy, and morally honorable. He excels in learning from his own past mistakes, and he excels in his brains, his rational faculty. What truly counts as good and bad for a human being can be found precisely and exclusively in those exact respects in which he differs from the dumb beasts. If his special, rational qualities are kept perfectly safe behind stout mental walls, and he does not ever lose his honor, his trustworthiness, or his intelligence, then the man is truly saved, no matter what happens to his house. But if you lose or take away absolutely any of these internal moral qualities, then the man himself is completely lost, even if he lives in a palace. Absolutely everything significant in human life depends entirely on this distinction, Epictetus stresses. Think back to the Trojan War. Did Paris's true tragedy lie in the Greeks' massive physical attack on Troy, when his brothers finally began to be slaughtered in the streets? No, Epictetus says. Absolutely no one is truly undone by the external actions of others. That physical destruction was just the burning of storks' nests. Paris's true tragedy lay much earlier, in the moral loss of the man who used to be honest, trustworthy, decent, and respectful of the sacred laws of hospitality, before he stole another man's wife. And wherein did the great hero Achilles' true tragedy lie? Was it the tragic death of his best friend Patroclus in battle? Not at all. His true tragedy was that he foolishly gave in to his own blind anger, that he whined and cried about losing a mere captive woman, Briseis, and that he completely lost sight of the fact that he was there not for some grand romance, but to actually fight a war. Those profound moral failures, Epictetus declares, those are the genuine, true human tragedies. That is the real siege and capture of a city, when a person's right judgments are completely subverted, and when their rational thoughts are fatally undermined from within. But a student objects, horrified by the physical reality of war. Women are brutally driven into captivity. Innocent children are enslaved, and men are violently put to the sword. Are you really telling me that absolutely none of this physical destruction is actually bad? Epictetus calmly asks, what exactly is the logical basis for adding that moral description of bad to those physical events? Please, let me in on your reasoning too. The student challenges him back. Why do not you logically explain instead exactly how they are not true evils? All right, Epictetus agrees. Let us turn to our objective standards, and let us produce our shared moral preconceptions to measure this. I mean, he says, shaking his head, this is exactly what completely flabbergasts me about human beings. If there is a practical question about the physical weight of an object, we certainly do not just formulate a random, guessing judgment about it. We use a physical scale. If it is a practical matter of judging whether a piece of wood is straight or crooked, we absolutely do not make our final decision based on a sudden emotional whim. We use a straightedge. If the objective truth of the case actually makes any real difference to us at all, he argues, then absolutely none of us operates blindly in the dark. We use our tools and standards. Yet, incredibly, when it comes to the absolute first and foremost cause of all good and bad human conduct, when it is a critical matter of doing well or ill in life, of ultimate moral failure or true success, it is only then that we choose to proceed completely blindly and erratically. Only then are we suddenly found to lack absolutely anything resembling a reliable scale or a logical measure. A simple sense impression appears in my mind, and right away, without testing it, I just blindly react to it. Am I somehow inherently better than the legendary kings Agamemnon and Achilles? He asks, insofar as they constantly do and suffer such terrible wrongs simply by blindly following their initial impressions, while their impression does not immediately satisfy me without a test. Is there actually any great tragedy in literature with a completely different source? He asks, listing famous plays. What exactly is the bloody tragedy of Atreus written by Euripides? It is nothing but an unchecked impression. The tragic Oedipus of Sophocles, just a flawed impression. The tragedy of Phoenix, an impression. The tragedy of Hippolytus, an impression. What exact kind of person, then, pays absolutely no attention whatsoever to the critical matter of testing their impressions, do you think? He asks his students. Well, he answers his own question. What do we normally call people in society who just accept every single thought indiscriminately? We call them madmen, the students admit. And Epictetus asks pointedly, do we ordinary people actually act any differently than those madmen when we fail to test our own impressions? The text then shifts to a new chapter, titled On Steadfastness. Epictetus begins with a core Stoic definition. The true essence of both good and evil consists entirely in the internal condition of our own character. And all external things in the world are simply the neutral means by which our internal character eventually finds its particular good and evil. How does it find its good? It finds its true good simply by not attaching any false moral value to those neutral external means. Making correct, rational judgments about external things makes our character good, just exactly as making perverse or distorted judgments about them makes our character bad. God himself has firmly fixed this universal law, Epictetus declares. God says to us, if you truly want something good in life, you must get it entirely from yourself. But you, the uneducated person, stubbornly say, no, I will get the good from another person, or from money, or from fame. And I, Epictetus says, acting as God's messenger, say to you again, no, you must get it from yourself. He gives a dramatic example of this steadfastness. If a powerful political tyrant angrily threatens me at his royal court, I calmly say to myself, what exactly is he threatening? If the tyrant says, I will put you in heavy iron chains, I say to myself, he is merely threatening my physical hands and feet. If he says, I will violently behead you, I say, he is merely threatening my physical neck. If he says, I will throw you into a dark prison, I say, he is merely threatening my entire physical body. And if he threatens me with political exile, I logically say the exact same thing. Well then, someone might ask me in amazement, are not you actually threatened by this tyrant, even just a little bit? If I truly feel in my character that all these physical things are absolutely nothing to me, Epictetus answers, then no, I am not threatened at all. But he admits, if I foolishly fear for the loss of absolutely any of them, then, yes, it is truly I who am being threatened by the tyrant. So, if I am truly steadfast, who is there left in the entire world for me to actually fear? And over what exactly does he have any real control? Certainly not over what is entirely in my own power, because absolutely no one controls that except myself. And as for absolutely everything else, whatever is not in my own direct power, in that I take absolutely no interest. But a critic might challenge this political stance. So, they ask, do you Stoic philosophers actually teach dangerous contempt for our political rulers? Not at all, Epictetus answers firmly. You do not find any of us philosophers actively preaching rebellion or defiance of the rulers within their actual physical range of competence. My physical body, my material property, my standing in society, my worldly friends, the rulers can absolutely have them all if they demand them. And I boldly challenge anyone to say that I ever encourage others to lay claim to those external things or to fight the government over them. Yes, the tyrannical king says, I will gladly take your body and your property, but I actually want total control over your internal judgments, too. Who exactly gave you that incredible power? Epictetus asks the tyrant. You can conquer lands, but you absolutely cannot add the private judgments of other people to your list of worldly conquests. I will win your mind by way of fear, the tyrant threatens. I will terrorize you into agreeing with me. You do not seem to realize the fundamental nature of human psychology, Epictetus tells him. The human mind is subject only to itself. It alone can control it. And this psychological reality perfectly shows the profound force and the absolute justice of God's universal edict. The strong shall always prevail over the weak. But wait, a student says, taking that literally. 10 men are physically stronger than 1 man, so the 10 will prevail. Yes, Epictetus agrees they are stronger, but for what exact purpose, though? They are stronger for taking people physically captive, for violently killing them or dragging them off to jail, and for taking away their material property. For deploying main, brute force, yes, 10 men are certainly better than 1. But he counters, one single person who possesses right moral judgments is vastly superior to 10 people who are without them. Pure numbers here are completely irrelevant. If you put them in the cosmic balance, the one person with correct philosophical ideas will heavily outweigh all the others combined. A student, still not understanding the distinction between the mind and the body, laments, "Oh, to think of the terrible indignities that the great Socrates suffered at the hands of the cruel Athenians." Not Socrates, stupid, Epictetus corrects him sharply. You must express yourself much more carefully. You should say instead, to think that Socrates' poor physical body should have been unjustly seized and violently hauled off to prison by men who were physically stronger than it. To think that somebody gave his poor body a cup of poisonous hemlock to drink, and to think that his body grew progressively colder until it was finally dead. What exactly seems so unjust or outrageous in this purely physical description, Epictetus asks, or what is worth blaming the gods for in that? Did not Socrates have incredible internal resources to completely compensate for the loss of his body? Where exactly was the true essence of the good for him? And who is more to be heeded in that regard, the great Socrates himself, or you? Socrates clearly stated his view on this at his trial. "My accusers Anytus and Meletus can certainly kill me," he said, "but they cannot possibly harm me." And he also said, "If it pleases the gods that I die, so be it." He was untouched. I dare you, Epictetus challenges his students, produce a single person in the world who can actually get the better of someone whose internal judgments are morally superior. You simply cannot do it, though, try as you might. This is God's fundamental law, and it is nature's law. Let the best man always win. But he clarifies, the man must be the best in his own specific area of expertise. One physical body is naturally stronger than another physical body. Many physical bodies are stronger than one. Therefore, a physical thief logically has the physical advantage here over someone who is not a professional thief. Epictetus shares a funny personal story to illustrate this. "This is exactly how I recently came to lose my own iron lamp," he says. "A thief stole it from me simply because the thief was much better than I am in staying awake late at night. I fell asleep, and he used his physical advantage. But Epictetus notes, the thief acquired that iron lamp at a terrible spiritual price. He actually became a thief just for the sake of an iron lamp. For its sake, he completely lost his own human ability to be trusted by others. For a cheap lamp, he became a brute animal. And the tragic irony is, the thief actually imagined that he somehow came out ahead in that transaction." Fine words you may say to me, Epictetus imagines, but what happens in the real world? Let us say right now I have been violently seized by the cloak, and I am being forcefully dragged downtown by the authorities. Bystanders point and shout mockingly, "Hey, philosopher! What good did all your fancy views do you after all? Look at you. You are being hauled off to a dark prison right now, and soon you will be beheaded." Tell me, Epictetus asks the mocking crowd, what textbook introduction to philosophy could I have possibly read that would have magically saved me from being dragged away, if a man who is physically stronger than me simply grabs me by the cloak? Or what philosophy book could have possibly kept my body out of a physical prison if I am suddenly assaulted by a violent gang of 10 men? None. What philosophy has actually taught me, though, he explains, is to be completely indifferent to all these physical events that are entirely beyond my own will's control. Have not you profited in this respect too? He asks. So he commands, absolutely do not look for any help from philosophy except in those specific internal areas where you have already learned that true help from it can be found. As I sit there in the physical prison, he imagines, I can rationally say to myself, whoever laughs at me out there is completely deaf to the real meaning of philosophical words. They simply cannot understand what they hear, and they honestly do not even care to know what it is that true philosophers say or do. Let them be. It is their loss, not mine. But then he continues the scenario. The official answer comes down. You are free, come out of the prison. He replies with total indifference. If you have absolutely no further political need of me here in the prison, I will happily come out. If you suddenly decide you need me again, I will happily go back in again. The authorities ask, confused by his calm, exactly how long will you keep this stubborn attitude up? For exactly as long as my rational mind naturally chooses to be with my physical body, he answers. But he warns them, when my mind no longer consents to be with it, then you can just take my dead body, and I bid a final farewell to it. Only Epictetus cautions his students about this final option. We absolutely must not part with our own body rashly or irrationally, or on some trivial, petty pretext. Because, again, God simply does not wish it. God needs us here on earth. He actually needs the human world that we actively help to populate. If, however, God clearly sounds the final signal for retreat, as he definitively did for Socrates when he was condemned, then we must absolutely obey that divine signal, as if it came directly from our Supreme Commander-in-Chief. Well, a student asks, should we try telling all this deep philosophy to the ignorant, angry mob? What would possibly be the point? Epictetus asks dismissively. It is entirely enough if we are completely convinced of it ourselves. He uses a cute analogy. When little children come running up to us clapping their hands happily and shouting, "Today is a good Saturnalia festival," do we stop and sternly say to them, the Saturnalia is not actually good because only virtue is good? Of course not. We just clap our hands right along with them and let them be happy. As for you, he advises the student, if you absolutely cannot change an uneducated person's mind with reason, simply realize that he is mentally no more than a little child and just clap hands with him. Play along. And if you honestly cannot bring yourself to even do that, then just keep your mouth completely quiet. It is absolutely essential that we remember this, Epictetus urges, so that, when real troubles finally do arise in our lives, we will know for a fact that it is finally time to practically exhibit what we have theoretically learned. He criticizes students who complain about real-world tests. A philosophy student fresh out of school who suddenly gets into a real-life difficulty and complains about it is exactly like someone who is highly practiced in the abstract solving of logical syllogisms. If anyone gives that logic student an easy syllogism, he confidently says, "No, give me a really knotty, difficult one instead. I want a bit of a real practice." In the exact same way, professional athletes absolutely do not like to be paired in the arena with weak pushovers. He cannot even lift me. One athlete complains, "This other guy over there is much better built. Let me fight him." But us philosophers, Epictetus asks with disgust, no, when the actual life crisis finally comes, we just groan and say, "But I just wanted to keep on learning in the classroom." Keep learning what exactly? Epictetus demands. If you did not learn all these things in order to actually demonstrate them in real messy practice, what on earth did you learn them for? I suppose, he muses, there might actually be some brave students who are sitting here right now losing their patience and thinking to themselves, why do I not ever get to face the kind of epic challenge that he did? I am just growing old in a dusty little corner, when I could be out there winning a glorious crown at the Olympia of life. When will I finally be nominated for a similar heroic trial? That, Epictetus declares, is the exact attitude that absolutely all of you should boldly adopt. There are professional gladiators at Rome, he notes, who get deeply frustrated and angry if they are not called out into the arena and matched with a deadly opponent, all the while desperately begging God and their own supervisors to finally be allowed to do battle one-on-one. Yet, he looks around his classroom. Absolutely none of you here shows anything even remotely like that same heroic mettle. Which is exactly why I would honestly like to escape this school and go to Rome just to see my own favorite wrestler in action, to see how he, at least, actually puts his physical policy into real practice. But a student whines, making excuses. These are absolutely not the specific circumstances that I want for my trial. Is it actually up to you to selfishly choose them? Epictetus shoots back. No. You have been given that particular physical body, you have been given these particular parents and brothers, you have been given this particular social position and this particular place to live in the world. And yet, you foolishly come to me, your teacher, hoping that I can somehow magically change all these external circumstances for you. You are not even consciously aware of the incredible internal assets that are already yours by nature, the very assets that make it entirely possible for you to successfully cope with absolutely any situation you might ever face. You should confidently say to me, Epictetus suggests, it is entirely yours to choose the specific exercise, and it is entirely mine to manage it well. That would be exactly right, he agrees. But instead of that brave attitude, you whine and say, please do not set me that kind of difficult hypothetical argument to solve. Give me that easy one instead. Please do not give me that complex compound proposition. Give me that other simple one. You want to control the test rather than pass it. Epictetus mocks this superficiality with a theatrical analogy. The time is fast coming, he warns, when professional actors of grand tragedy will actually start to deeply identify with their own fake masks, with their high-heeled stage boots, and with their long, flowing royal robes. Wake up, he shouts to them. Those external things are absolutely nothing but theatrical props representing your current physical circumstances and your worldly situation. They are not the real you. Say something, he challenges the actor, speak a line, so that we will actually know whether you are a grand tragic actor or just the comic relief. Because underneath it all, the basic human costume you two have is exactly in common. Does the great tragic actor simply disappear, he asks, if you take away his fancy stage boots and his painted mask, and if you bring him on stage looking like a mere shadow of his former glorious self? Or is he still there inside? The answer is obvious. If he truly has the right, powerful voice of a trained actor, he absolutely remains a tragic actor, regardless of his clothes. So it is in real life, Epictetus explains. Let us take a high political governorship. A good philosopher says, I take the governorship, and when I take it, I clearly show exactly how a real philosopher acts in high office. But then fortune changes. Take off your rich senator's robe, the world demands, and put on these filthy beggar's rags, and let us have a good look at you then. The true philosopher calmly replies, well, so what if I wear rags? I still have the precious gift of a fine philosophical voice to show off. And what specific role do you appear in now, wearing those rags? Epictetus asks. You appear in the greatest role of all, as a star witness specifically called by God himself. God says to you, step forward, you, and bear public witness for me. Through your philosophical training, you have actually earned the rare right to represent me as a witness to the world. Tell them, Is absolutely anything truly good or bad that is independent of your own will? Do I, God, ever do any man harm? Have I put each man's ultimate advantage under the control of absolutely anyone except himself? But Epictetus asks his whining students, what kind of weak witness do you actually bear to God when you are tested? You cry and complain, saying, "Oh, I am in terrible difficulty, Lord, and I am so pitiable. Absolutely no one cares about me. No one helps me. I am the object of universal scorn." Is that really the cowardly witness you are going to bear? Epictetus asks in disgust. Are you intentionally making a complete mockery of God's divine summons, especially when he so highly honored you and judged you personally worthy to be his public spokesman in the world? But a student worries about public reputation. What if someone in high political authority formally pronounces you to be godless and atheistic? How are you internally affected by that terrible slander? I simply state the bare fact. Epictetus answers. I say, I have been judged godless and atheistic by that man. And nothing more, the student asks. Nothing more at all, Epictetus replies. Think of it logically. If that same ignorant politician had passed a formal judgment on a basic conditional argument in a textbook, and he officially said the logical proposition that if it is day, it is light, I now declare to be completely false. Well, what has actually happened to the conditional proposition? Nothing. Who is actually being judged in this case? Who has truly been condemned? The innocent conditional proposition, or the foolish person who got it so completely wrong? The person who got it wrong is the one who is condemned by his own ignorance. Well then, Epictetus reasons, who exactly is this worldly man who is supposedly empowered to pass moral judgment on you? Does he actually know absolutely anything about what is truly religious or irreligious? Has he ever genuinely studied and learned about it? Exactly where did he study and from whom? You know perfectly well, he points out, that a trained musician has absolutely no consideration or respect for anyone who foolishly mistakes the highest string on the lyre for the lowest string. And anyone who confidently affirms that, in a perfect geometric circle, the straight lines that extend from the center out to the circumference can somehow be unequal to each other, is absolutely not going to win the intellectual respect of any trained mathematicians. So he concludes, a true philosopher is under absolutely no moral obligation to respect the vulgar, uneducated opinion of the masses as to what is actually religious or irreligious, or what is truly just or unjust. What a terrible dishonor he would bring on philosophers in general if he actually did respect their ignorant opinions. That is absolutely not what you learned here in this school. Would not you much rather just leave all these petty arguments about these subjects to lazy do-nothings who just sit safely in a dusty corner and receive their little daily stipend, or who get absolutely nothing and just whine about it? No, you must step forward bravely and actually make real use of what you have learned here. It certainly is not more abstract logic chopping that is needed in the world right now, he declares. Our Stoic library texts are already completely full of that. What we desperately need now are real people to actually apply their philosophical learning and to bear living witness to their learning in their daily actions. Please, Epictetus begs his students, be the one to finally take on this noble character. I am so tired in my teaching of constantly having to invoke dead examples of heroes from the distant past. I desperately want to be able to hold up a living, breathing example of a true Stoic from my own time. Consideration of these deep philosophical factors, he admits, certainly belongs to people who actually have the leisure time for it, because man is naturally an animal made for high abstract thought. But he insists, for our own honor's sake, let us absolutely not be seen studying these noble subjects as if we were terrified slaves who have just run away from their cruel masters. Instead, he paints a picture of calm. We should sit perfectly composed, completely without distraction, peacefully listening now to the tragic actor on stage, and now to the beautiful musician. We should absolutely not act like terrified escapees who are superficially moved to praise the performers, while continually and nervously glancing around the theater for the authorities, and who completely come apart in a panic if their old master's dreaded name is suddenly dropped in conversation. It is completely beneath the dignity of true philosophers, he says, to study the grand nature of the universe in this cowardly, fearful spirit. For what exactly does the word master even mean? One mortal man is absolutely not the true master of another mortal man. The only true masters in this physical world are the basic forces of death and life, pleasure and pain. So Epictetus declares, "You could bring the mighty Emperor Caesar himself before me, and as long as he does not bring these other terrifying things with him, I remain perfectly resolute." But he admits human weakness, when the emperor violently comes in like thunder and lightning, angrily brandishing the threat of pain and death, and I show cowardly fear in response to those threats, then in effect I truly have been brought face to face with my absolute master, just exactly like that terrified runaway slave. And even while I might temporarily have a lucky reprieve from these frightening factors, my panicked attention to the beautiful performance of life is really no better than the runaway slave's attention. I may wash myself, I may drink wine, I may sing songs, but I do it all in a miserable spirit of gloom and constant foreboding about the future. If, however, Epictetus offers the solution, I successfully liberate myself from my true master, which is to say, if I liberate myself from my own internal emotions that actually make my physical master seem so frightening, then what possible troubles can I ever have? Absolutely no man is my master any longer, because I no longer fear what he can do to me. Well, a student wonders, is it our philosophical duty to loudly announce these deep truths to absolutely everyone in society? No, Epictetus advises practically. Instead of lecturing them, we just need to patiently make allowances for ordinary people who are without the great benefit of moral education. When they act badly, we should simply say to ourselves, "He is telling me to do this wrong thing," or "He is threatening me," simply because he falsely imagines that it is actually good for himself as well. He is ignorant, so I simply cannot blame him for it. He gives a beautiful example of this grace. The great Socrates himself kindly forgave his own jailer when Socrates finally began to drink the fatal hemlock poison, and the poor jailer actually broke down in tears over it. Socrates did not mock the man. He gently said, "It shows great generosity of spirit for this man to grieve for us." Does Socrates angrily say to the ignorant jailer, "Stop crying"? That emotional weakness is exactly why we would not let the weeping women in here today. No, of course not. Socrates only says that strict philosophical correction to his own close friends, to the educated men who can actually assimilate the lesson. The ignorant jailer, though, he kindly indulges and comforts exactly as he would a little child. The text then moves to a short but powerful new chapter, titled How to Prepare for Trouble. Epictetus gives his students a stark mental exercise. In the terrifying event that you are suddenly hailed into court before some mighty emperor wielding the absolute reins of worldly power, you must always remember that there is actually somebody else, much higher, looking down from above, and you have to answer first to him, to God. So God actively examines you in that moment of crisis. God asks, how exactly did you categorize all these scary things? Political exile, dark imprisonment, iron chains, physical death, and public disgrace, when you were safely sitting in the philosophy school. And you must honestly answer God. I logically said that they were all morally indifferent. And what do you call them right now, standing before this tyrant? God asks you. They have not magically changed their fundamental nature, I presume. And you must hold your ground and answer, no, God, they have not. Well, God continues his examination. Have you yourself somehow changed your core beliefs? No, you answer firmly, I have not changed. Then define for me right now exactly what the indifferents actually are. God demands. And you proudly recite your Stoic lesson. The indifferents are absolutely whatever things we simply cannot control. Tell me the practical upshot of that definition, God says. The practical upshot is that they are absolutely nothing to me, you reply. Remind me then, God says, exactly what you previously thought was truly good in life. The only true good, you answer, is my own rational will and my right use of my internal impressions. And the ultimate goal of human life is what? God asks. The goal of life is to completely follow God. You answer faithfully. And do you actually stand by that profound statement right now, standing here before this terrifying tyrant? God asks. Yes, you declare boldly, I say it even now. Go, then, in total confidence, God commands you, holding incredibly fast to these unshakable convictions. If you do this, Epictetus promises his students, you will finally see exactly what it is like to be a young person armed with a true philosophical education, standing calmly alongside worldly people who have absolutely none. I promise that when you face that dreaded tyrant, you will feel somewhat like this. You will think, why on earth do we actually serve such an incredibly long and difficult philosophical apprenticeship in school, just in preparation to face these pathetic nonentities? Is this exactly what worldly authority meant all along? Are these grand royal courtyards, this massive palace staff, and all these armed guards really no more than this? Was this trivial, powerless illusion the entire reason why I nervously sat through so many complex lectures? It all just amounts to absolutely nothing, and here I was expecting to be totally overwhelmed. We now move into Book 2 of the Discourses. The very first chapter is titled, That Confidence Does Not Conflict with Caution. To some people, perhaps, Epictetus begins, exactly what we Stoic philosophers say will naturally appear completely impossible. But let us logically investigate, all the same, whether it is actually true that in our daily, practical lives we can possibly act with both extreme caution and extreme confidence at the exact same time. It certainly seems impossible at first glance, he admits, simply because the two concepts are evidently total opposites, and opposites supposedly cannot possibly coexist in a single action. But what most ordinary people consider to be so very strange, I think can easily be explained on the following logical hypothesis. If we are actually talking about using both confidence and caution on the exact same external objects, then we might very fairly be accused of trying to magically reconcile two irreconcilables. But he clarifies, Our philosophical claim does not actually involve anything so strange or contradictory. We have often said, and we have clearly shown, he reminds them, that the correct use of our mental impressions absolutely represents for us the total essence of both good and evil, and that true good and true evil absolutely have to do with the human will alone. And if that fundamental premise is true, then absolutely nothing is impractical in the philosopher's famous advice to be entirely confident in absolutely everything outside the will, and be extremely cautious in absolutely everything that is under the will's direct control. For if true moral evil is entirely a matter of the human will, then extreme caution is desperately needed right there. And if absolutely everything beyond our will, and therefore not in our direct control, is completely immaterial to us, then all those external things can be safely approached with total confidence. And so, you see, he concludes triumphantly, that is exactly how we can be completely cautious and completely confident at the very same time. And in fact, we become completely confident entirely owing to our extreme caution. For by constantly being strictly on our guard against internal moral evils within our will, we can naturally approach all external things, whose nature is not actually evil, in a wonderful spirit of total assurance. Instead of this rational approach, however, he observes sadly, we foolishly act exactly like wild deer. When deer are artificially frightened by the fluttering feathers that hunters tie to ropes to scare them, they panic and blindly seek safety by running directly into the hunter's deadly nets. Completely confusing absolute ruin with a safe refuge, they foolishly run to an ill-timed death. Similarly, Epictetus warns, terrible fear wrongly afflicts us in worldly matters that are completely outside the will's control, while we foolishly act. While we foolishly act completely confidently and casually in critical matters that are entirely dependent on our own will, treating them exactly as if they were of absolutely no moral importance. Think about how true this is, Epictetus urges. To be terribly deceived in our judgments, or to be rash, to act shamelessly in public, or to act with unbridled, destructive lust. Absolutely none of this terrible moral corruption seems to matter to us, just as long as we somehow have material success in affairs that are entirely outside the will. But when we face the mere prospect of physical death, political exile, bodily pain, and public ill repute, right there you will find our cowardly impulse to tremble in terror and run away. So, as you would expect when such a profound error involves the things of the greatest moral importance, our natural, healthy confidence is horribly perverted into destructive rashness, thoughtlessness, recklessness, and shamelessness. And at the exact same time, filled with all fear and mental agitation, we foolishly exchange our natural, protective caution and reserve for a pathetic meekness and timidity before the world. The solution is simple, he says. Transfer your caution entirely to the will and to the internal functions of the will. If you do this, the mere wish to avoid an evil will automatically bring with it the absolute power of avoidance, because your will is totally under your own control. But if we wrongly direct our caution at what is physically outside of us, and which is none of our personal responsibility, wanting instead to somehow avoid what is entirely in the control of other people or fate, we are necessarily going to meet with terrible fear, emotional upset, and mental confusion. Physical death and physical pain are simply not frightening in themselves, Epictetus insists. It is only the internal fear of pain and the fear of death that we actually need to fear. which is exactly why we rightly praise the tragic poet who so wisely wrote, "Death is not fearful, but dying like a coward is fearful." So he instructs them, you must be completely confident about facing death itself, and instead you must fiercely caution yourself against the internal fear of it. This is exactly just the direct opposite, in other words, of what we are all doing right now. Right now, we physically shrink from death in terror, whereas our own internal philosophical views about death hardly concern us at all. We hardly give our own judgments a single thought, and we are completely apathetic about our own moral condition. The wise Socrates used to playfully call such irrational human fears hobgoblins, and rightly so. Epictetus says, "Just as painted theatrical masks easily scare and frighten little children simply because they have not seen them before, we adults react to external life events in much the exact same way, and for much the exact same foolish reason." What exactly is a child fundamentally? A child is just ignorance and inexperience, because, with respect to what it actually knows, a child is every bit our rational equal. So what exactly is death then? It is just a scary theatrical mask. Take the mask off, see, it does not actually bite. Eventually, by the laws of nature, the physical body and the soul will just have to separate, just exactly as they existed separately before we were even born. So why on earth be so upset if that separation happens right now? Because if it is not now, it is certainly going to be later. And why does it happen now, if that happens to be the case for you? Simply to accommodate the great natural cycle of the world. Because the universe naturally needs some things to come into being right now, it needs other things to come into being later, and it absolutely needs things whose time is now complete to pass away. Physical pain, too, is just a scary mask, Epictetus assures them. Logically look under it and you will see the truth. The physical body sometimes suffers, yes, but natural relief is never really far behind. And if that temporary relief simply is not good enough for you, remember that the door of suicide always stands wide open for you to leave. Otherwise, if you stay, simply put up with the pain. The door of exit needs to logically stay open, whatever the terrible circumstances, with the wonderful result that our feelings of being trapped by problems completely disappear. The ultimate fruit of these Stoic doctrines is the best and the most beautiful thing in the world, exactly as it ought to be for individuals who are truly, deeply educated. What is that fruit? It is total freedom from trouble, total freedom from fear. It is absolute freedom in general. The ignorant masses are completely wrong to say that only legally freeborn men are entitled to get an education. You must believe the philosophers instead, who teach the exact opposite. They say that only truly educated people are entitled to be called free. I will explain exactly why this is, Epictetus promises. What else is true freedom, ultimately, but the absolute power to freely live our life exactly the way we want? Nothing else, you agree? Do you actually want to live your life constantly doing wrong things? Epictetus asks. No, you answer. Therefore, he deduces logically, absolutely no one who is doing wrong is truly free. He asks another question. Do you want to live your life drowning in fear, grief, and anxiety? Of course not, you reply. So he concludes, no one who lives in a state of constant fear and anxiety is truly free, either. By the exact same token, whoever has finally gained complete philosophical relief from grief, fear, and anxiety has finally gained true freedom. What possible confidence, then, can we have in our own dear political legislators when they proudly say that only legally freeborn people are entitled to get an education, when the wise philosophers correctly contend that only people who are already morally educated can actually be considered free? The legislators have it entirely backwards. God will absolutely not allow true freedom to be given by a legal decree, you see. But a student objects. What about a legal master who officially performs the civil ceremony of manumitting a slave and setting him free? Is absolutely nothing actually accomplished by that legal ceremony? Certainly something is accomplished, Epictetus jokes. The master has officially performed the civil ceremony, and on top of that, he has paid a heavy 5% tax to the Roman state. But what about his slave? The student presses. Has he not actually come by his true freedom in the process? No more than he has instantly come by true peace of mind, Epictetus answers. Legal freedom does not magically change your internal state. I mean, he challenges the student. Consider your own personal case. You yourself legally have slaves and you have the civil power to free them right now. But exactly what master, I wonder, do you yourself actually serve in your heart? Do you serve money, women, young boys? Do you serve the political emperor or one of his powerful subordinates? It absolutely has to be one of them who is your true master, or else you would not constantly fret and worry about such worldly things. You are a slave yourself. This exact dynamic is exactly why I so often repeat to you the absolute need to deeply think about these things, he says, and to have these philosophical thoughts completely ready to hand at all times. Namely, the practical knowledge of exactly what you should treat with bold confidence, and exactly what you should treat with extreme caution. You must constantly remember that you can treat with total confidence absolutely whatever lies entirely outside the will, but you absolutely must treat with extreme caution what lies safely within it. But a vain student interrupts, seeking praise. Did I not read my philosophical essay aloud to you just yesterday? And did you not take careful note of my brilliant performance? I certainly noticed your clever, pretty phrases. Yes, Epictetus answers dismissively, and you can absolutely have them. Show me instead how you actually practice your internal desire and your aversion in real life, to actually get the moral good what you want, and to successfully avoid the moral evil what you do not want. As for those flowery written treatises of yours, if you actually have any common sense at all, you will go right now and burn them in the fire. But the student protests defensively. Was the great Socrates himself not a writer, and a very prolific one at that? Yes, he was, Epictetus admits, but for what exact purpose did he write? Since there was not always another philosopher available whose ideas Socrates could actively examine, or who could critically examine Socrates' own ideas in turn. Sometimes Socrates would write just to test and examine himself, forever subjecting to intense scrutiny one assumption or another. That specific kind of rigorous self-examination is the only valid writing of a real philosopher, Epictetus declares. Whereas just writing pretty phrases in a fancy dialogue form, Socrates gladly leaves to others, to shallow aesthetes and lazy idlers who just lie about all day, and who have absolutely no patience for rigorous logical reasoning simply because they are too stupid for it. Even right now, Epictetus sighs, looking at the vain student. If the opportunity presents itself, I know you will immediately go off to read and make public those flowery compositions of yours, and you will foolishly pride yourself on being so very fluent in the famous dialogue form. Please do not do it, man, Epictetus begs him. What I would much rather hear from you instead of a speech is this: look, Epictetus, look how I do not fail in my own internal desires to get what is good, and look how I do not ever have experiences that I rationally do not want. I will actively prove it to you in my reaction to the terrifying case of my own death. I will actively prove it to you in the case of intense physical pain, in the grim case of prison, of political condemnation, and of public ill repute. That kind of moral steadfastness under pressure, Epictetus declares, that is the real, ultimate test of a youth who is actually fit to finish this philosophy school. Forget completely about all that other superficial, showy stuff.